I'll never forget the moment I heard those words. I'd slipped into Luke's classroom for open day, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't embarrass him. I was running late from work, still wearing my construction boots and dusty jeans. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. That's when I heard Mrs. Carmichael's voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Some kids just aren't made for success," she said, her eyes landing on my 12-year-old son. The class erupted in laughter. Luke's face turned red. His shoulders hunched forward like he was trying to disappear into his desk. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to burst through that door and defend him. But I didn't. I stood there frozen, watching my boy crumble under the weight of her cruelty. Mrs. Carmichael caught my eye through the doorway. For a second, we just stared at each other. I didn't yell. I didn't move. I just turned around and walked away. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. The drive home was silent. Luke sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, saying nothing. I wanted to ask him how long this had been going on, but the words caught in my throat. When we got home, he went straight to his room and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to breathe. Later that night, I walked past his room and heard him muttering to himself, "She's right, Dad. I'll never be anything." Those words hit me harder than any punch I'd ever taken. My son, my only child, the boy who still had his mother's smile, believed he was worthless. I leaned against the wall, fighting back tears. His mother would have known what to say. She always did. But she'd been gone for 3 years now, and I was all he had left. I made him dinner in silence, mac and cheese with hot dogs, his favorite. He barely touched it. That night, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't define him. I'd make sure of it. The next morning, I called the school and scheduled a meeting with the principal. Mr. Henderson was a thin man with round glasses who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I explained what I'd witnessed, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. He nodded along, taking notes, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. Then Mrs. Carmichael was called in. She sat across from me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and twisted the entire story. "Mr. Weaver tends to overreact," she said smoothly. "Luke struggles with focus and effort. I was simply encouraging the class to work harder." Mr. Henderson bought every word. "Sometimes tough love is necessary," he said, looking at me like I was a problem. I left that office feeling hollow. As I walked down the hallway, I passed Mrs. Carmichael. She smiled at me, that same cold smile. "Some parents just can't accept reality," she said quietly. Something inside me hardened. If they wouldn't help my son, I would. Game on. That night, I cleared out the garage. It was filled with boxes of my late wife's things, old tools, and junk we'd been meaning to throw away for years. I found my old engineering manuals from trade school, dusty and worn, and set them on a workbench. When Luke came home from school, I called him outside. "What's all this?" he asked, looking confused. "This is where we start," I said. I taught him how to read a circuit board, how to solder wires, how to measure voltage. At first, he was hesitant, scared of messing up, but slowly he started to get it. His eyes lit up when the small LED bulb we'd wired finally glowed. "I did that," he whispered. "You did that," I said. For the first time in weeks, I saw him smile. We worked every night after dinner, turning that garage into our own little world. A few months later, Luke entered a small regional project contest. He built a simple alarm system for bike locks. When the results came in, he'd won 3rd place. I was so proud I could have burst. But when I asked the school about the certificate, they said they never received one. Mrs. Carmichael claimed it must have been lost in the mail. I didn't believe her for a second. I went to the contest organizers myself and got a copy of the certificate. They confirmed it had been mailed directly to the school, addressed to Mrs. Carmichael. When I confronted her, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't recall receiving anything." Luke was devastated. He thought he'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe he hadn't really won. I sat him down that night and showed him the proof. "You earned this," I said, handing him the certificate. "Don't let anyone take that from you." But the damage was done. He started doubting himself again, asking if he was really good enough. I started keeping a notebook after that, writing down every incident, every insult, every time she tried to sabotage him. Dates times witnesses. I wasn't going to let her erase my son's achievements anymore. One day, I told myself this would all matter. One day, she'd have to answer for what she'd done. I just had to be patient. But patience came at a cost. Mrs. Carmichael started spreading rumors. She told other parents that I was pushing Luke too hard, that I couldn't accept his limitations, that I was living through him because of my own failures. Some parents I'd known for years started avoiding me at pickup. One mother I'd always been friendly with pulled her daughter away when Luke tried to say hello. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Luke noticed it too. "Dad, why don't people like us anymore?" he asked one afternoon. I didn't know what to tell him. The truth was too ugly. So I just said, people believe what they want to believe. One evening, as we sat in the garage working on a new project, he asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Dad, why don't we just leave the school?" I looked at him, this boy who'd been knocked down so many times and was still standing. "Because running isn't how we win," I said. He nodded slowly, and we got back to work. But inside, I was terrified I was making the wrong choice. Things got worse before they got better. Luke had a big project due, something he'd spent weeks working on. He'd built a small water filtration system using recycled materials. It was brilliant, creative, and way beyond what most kids his age could do. The night before it was due, he brought all his notes to school to finish his presentation. The next day, he came home in tears. "She said she never saw my notes," he sobbed. "She said I didn't turn anything in." Without his notes, he couldn't present. He failed the assignment. I was done being polite. I marched into that school and found Mrs. Carmichael in her classroom. "Where are his notes?" I demanded. She looked at me with that same cold smile. "He's just not gifted, Mr. Weaver. Don't torture him with expectations he'll never meet." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "You'll eat those words." She laughed. Actually laughed. "We'll see," she said. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. But that night, I made a new plan. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one. Just not the kind she expected. I started researching free programs around the city. There were weekend STEM workshops at the community college, after-school clubs at the library, and online competitions Luke could enter without the school's involvement. Every Saturday morning, we drove across town so he could attend the engineering program. At first, he was nervous, but the instructors there saw what I saw, a smart, capable kid who just needed someone to believe in him. He started coming home excited, talking about circuits and motors and ideas that went way over my head. Our bond grew stronger. We weren't just father and son anymore. We were a team. One night, as we sat in the garage working on a small robotic arm, Luke looked up at me. "Dad, I want to compete for the National Youth Engineering Award." I'd heard of it before. It was a huge deal, the kind of thing that could change a kid's life. "Then we'll make it happen," I said. His face lit up. For the first time since his mother died, I felt like we were building towards something real, something no one could take away from us. But Mrs. Carmichael had other plans. Somehow, she found out about Luke's intention to apply. The award required a school endorsement, and she convinced Mr. Henderson not to sign off on it. "He'll embarrass the school," she told him. "He's not ready for that level of competition." When the rejection letter came, Luke was heartbroken. He sat on his bed holding the paper, tears streaming down his face. "I'm never going to be good enough, am I?" he whispered. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back to that school and tear it apart brick by brick. But instead, I did something else. I stayed up all night rewriting his application. I found a loophole. Students could apply independently without school endorsement if they had a licensed mentor. I was a certified tradesman. I qualified. By sunrise, I'd submitted the application under Luke's name. I didn't tell him. I didn't want him to get his hopes up, but deep down, I knew this was our shot. This was the moment that would prove everyone wrong. Weeks passed. Life went on. Luke kept going to his weekend programs, kept building projects in the garage, kept pushing forward even when everything felt hopeless. Then one afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail. My hand shook as I opened it. Dear Luke Weaver, congratulations. You have been shortlisted as a semi-finalist for the National Youth Engineering Award. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. When Luke got home from school, I handed him the letter without saying a word. He read it slowly, his eyes going wide. Dad, is this real? He whispered. It's real, I said. He threw his arms around me and cried. Not sad tears this time. Happy ones. The next day at school, Mrs. Carmichael mocked him again in front of the whole class. Still chasing dreams that don't fit you, Luke? She said. But this time, Luke didn't shrink. He looked her right in the eye and smiled. Maybe, he said. I don't think she knew what to make of that. But I did. My son was starting to believe in himself again. And that was the most dangerous thing she could face. The next few months were a blur. Late nights in the garage, soldering circuits, burning our fingers on hot metal, laughing through exhaustion. Luke worked harder than I'd ever seen anyone work. He designed a water-powered generator using scrap materials, something that could help communities without electricity. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but he refused to give up. There were nights I collapsed from exhaustion, falling asleep at the workbench. Luke would cover me with a blanket and keep working. One night, I woke up on the couch to find him tucking me in. You okay, Dad? He asked. I'm fine, I said, just proud of you. He smiled, that smile that reminded me so much of his mother. You believed in me first, he whispered. I thought about all the people who doubted him, all the times he'd been knocked down. But here he was, still standing, still fighting. His mother would have been so proud. I wish she could see this. I wish she could see how strong he'd become. That thought kept me going through the hard nights, through the doubt, through everything. Finally, it was time to submit the final project. Luke carefully packed everything into boxes, and we drove to submission center together. I felt like we were carrying something precious, something that could change everything. But a few days later, I got a call from the competition organizers. We received a complaint about your son's project, the woman said. My stomach dropped. What kind of complaint? Someone claiming he received unauthorized mentorship, that the work isn't truly his. I knew immediately who'd made that call. Mrs. Carmichael. She was trying to disqualify him. My hands shook with anger as I explained that I was a licensed tradesman, that my mentorship was completely legal, that everything Luke had done was his own work. There was a long pause. Then the woman said, "We've reviewed the complaint. Your mentorship qualifies under our rules. Your son's project will remain in the competition." I hung up and sat in my truck for a long time, just breathing. She'd tried to destroy him one more time, but this time she'd failed. For once, she'd been silenced, and it felt like a small victory in a very long war. A few weeks later, we got the call. Luke had been selected for live demonstrations. The judges wanted to see his project in action. We loaded everything into my truck and drove 3 towns away to the testing facility. Luke was nervous, practicing his presentation over and over. What if it doesn't work? He kept asking. It'll work, I told him. You built it. It'll work. But when it was his turn to present, everything that could go wrong did. The water pump malfunctioned. The generator sputtered and died. Luke's face went pale. I could see him giving up right there in front of everyone. I walked over and knelt beside him. Remember what your mom used to say? When something breaks, you fix it. You don't quit. He looked at me, tears in his eyes. Fix it like it's the last thing your mom would see. I whispered. Something changed in his face. He took a deep breath, grabbed his tools, and got to work. 20 minutes later, the generator roared to life. The judges applauded. We'd done it. Somehow we pulled it off. On the drive home, Luke fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted but smiling. I'd never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. Then we waited. The results were supposed to come in a few months, but those months felt like years. Life moved on. Luke finished middle school and started high school. Mrs. Carmichael got promoted to vice principal. She walked the halls like she owned the place, smug and untouchable. Luke tried not to let it bother him, but I could see it ate at him. He'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and she was still winning. Then one afternoon in late August, a letter arrived. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Congratulations, you've been selected as a national finalist." I read it again. And again. Luke was in the finals. Out of thousands of kids across the country, my son had made it to the top 10. When he got home, I handed him the letter. He read it silently, then looked up at me with wide eyes. "Dad, I made it. I actually made it." "You did," I said, my voice breaking. We hugged right there in the kitchen, both of us crying. Everything we'd been through, every late night, every insult, every setback, it had all led to this moment. And the best part? The award ceremony was going to be held at his old middle school. The universe had a sense of humor, after all. The irony was almost too perfect. Mrs. Carmichael, now vice principal, was in charge of organizing the event. The school sent out a letter to all the families, boasting about how their commitment to excellence had produced a national finalist. I laughed when I read it. They hadn't done anything but try to stop him, but I kept quiet. I didn't tell anyone at the school that Luke was a finalist they were talking about. I wanted it to be a surprise. At the school assembly, Mrs. Carmichael stood at the podium, her voice dripping with pride. "This is a testament to our school's dedication to nurturing young minds," she said. "We're honored to host such a prestigious event." Luke sat in the audience, watching her. I could see the anger in his eyes, but also something else. Determination. After the assembly, he came up to me. "She doesn't even know it's me, does she?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but she will." He smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't a sad smile or a scared smile. It was a smile of someone who knew they'd already won. We just had to wait for everyone else to find out. The weeks leading up to the ceremony were surreal. Luke practiced his speech every night, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to find the right words. I'd ordered a custom trophy case, one with both of our names engraved on a small plaque at the bottom. It felt important to me that people knew we'd done this together. One evening, as we sat in the garage one last time before the big day, Luke asked me a question. "Dad, will she even remember me?" I looked at my son, this boy who'd grown so much in the past year. "Oh, she will," I said. He nodded, satisfied. The night before the ceremony, I barely slept. I kept thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation, the tears, the late nights, the small victories, and the crushing defeats. It all felt like it was building towards something bigger than just an award. This was about dignity. This was about proving that no one, no matter how powerful they seemed, could take away your worth. When the morning finally came, I got dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to my wife's funeral. It felt right somehow, like she was there with us. The school auditorium was transformed. Banners hung from the ceiling. Cameras were set up everywhere, and hundreds of families filled the seats. Mrs. Carmichael stood near the entrance in a navy blue dress, greeting people with a bright smile. She looked so confident, so sure of herself. Then Luke and I walked through the door. Her smile faltered. Her eyes went wide. "You," she stammered. "What are you doing here?" I looked at her calmly, savoring the moment. "You'll see," I said. We walked past her and took our seats near the front. I could feel her staring at us, trying to figure out what was happening. Luke sat beside me, his hands folded in his lap, calm and steady. "You ready?" I whispered. "I'm ready," he said. The lights dimmed. The ceremony was about to begin, and Mrs. Carmichael still had no idea that the boy she spent years tearing down was about to become the center of attention. I glanced back at her one more time. She looked confused, maybe even a little scared. Good. She should be, because everything was about to change, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The host, a woman in a red blazer, stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we celebrate the brightest young minds in engineering from across the nation." The audience applauded. I glanced at Luke. His jaw was set, his eyes focused. These 10 finalists have demonstrated exceptional creativity, problem-solving, and dedication. But there can only be one winner. The room went silent. You could hear people breathing. And this year's winner of the National Youth Engineering Award is... She paused, letting the tension build. I reached over and squeezed Luke's hand. Luke Weaver. The room erupted. People gasped. Cameras flashed. I turned to look at Mrs. Carmichael. Her face had gone completely white. Her mouth hung open slightly, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Parents around us stood and applauded. Luke stood slowly, almost like he was in a dream. I stood with him, my hand on his shoulder. Go on, I whispered. You earned this. He walked toward the stage, and I followed a few steps behind. Every eye in that auditorium was on him. And for the first time in his life, it wasn't because someone was mocking him. It was because he'd done something extraordinary. Luke stepped up to the microphone. His hands were shaking, but his voice was strong. Thank you, he said. This means more to me than you could ever know. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Then his eyes found Mrs. Carmichael, standing frozen at the back of the room. A few years ago, a teacher told me I'd never be anything. She said some kids just aren't made for success. She said it in front of my entire class. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. For a long time, I believed her. I thought maybe she was right, that I was just wasting everyone's time. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. But my dad never stopped believing in me. He taught me that success isn't about being perfect. It's about not giving up, even when everyone else thinks you should. People started standing. One by one, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. I looked at Mrs. Carmichael. She had her head down, her hand covering her mouth. She was trembling. Luke finished his speech, thanked the judges, and walked off the stage holding the trophy. When he reached me, I pulled him into a hug. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. We did it, Dad, he said. We actually did it. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the years of pain, not the people who doubted us, not the battles we'd fought. We'd won. Not because we destroyed anyone, but because we refused to give up. That was the real victory. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed us. Local news stations wanted interviews. Parents who'd once avoided us came up to congratulate Luke. We had no idea, one mother said. We should have known better. I didn't say much. I just stood next to my son and let him have his moment. Photographers took pictures of Luke holding his trophy, smiling wider than I'd seen in years. The story spread fast. By the next morning, it was all over local news. Father and son beat the odds. Bullied student becomes national champion. The school's phone lines were flooded with calls. Some were congratulatory. Others were furious, demanding to know why a student with this much potential had been overlooked and mistreated. Mr. Henderson, the principal, tried to do damage control. He gave interviews praising Luke, talking about the school's supportive environment. It made me sick, but I didn't engage. This wasn't about revenge. It was about Luke. Mrs. Carmichael disappeared. She didn't come to school the next day, or the day after that. Rumor had it she called in sick. But I knew the truth. She was hiding. And honestly, I didn't blame her. She'd spent years tearing down a child, and now the whole world knew what she'd done. Then the floodgates opened. Other parents started coming forward with complaints about Mrs. Carmichael. Stories of bullying, favoritism, and cruelty that had been buried for years. One mother shared an email where Mrs. Carmichael had called her daughter lazy and destined to fail. Another parent produced recordings of phone calls where she blamed students for their own struggles. The school board launched a formal investigation. Local news picked up the story. Suddenly, Mrs. Carmichael wasn't just a mean teacher. She was the face of everything wrong with the education system. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching it all unfold. Part of me felt vindicated. She tried to destroy my son, and now she was facing consequences. But another part of me just felt sad. Sad that it had taken this long. Sad that other kids had suffered. Sad that it took a national award for anyone to listen. Within 2 weeks, the school board made an announcement. Mrs. Carmichael was suspended pending the results of the investigation. She wouldn't be returning to the classroom. Luke didn't celebrate when he heard the news. He just nodded quietly. I hope she learned something, he said. That's when I knew I'd raise him right. Even after everything, he didn't want revenge. He just wanted things to be better. A few days later, an envelope appeared in our mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. Mr. Weaver, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect Luke to forgive me either. I've spent the last few weeks thinking about everything I've done, all the students I hurt because I was bitter and tired, and forgot why I became a teacher in the first place. Luke deserved better. They all did. I'm sorry. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. I showed it to Luke. He read it silently, then folded it back up. Do you forgive her? I asked. He thought for a long moment. I don't know yet, he said, but maybe one day. I was okay with that answer. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone. It's something you give when you're ready. That same week, Luke received a letter from a prestigious technical university offering him a full scholarship. He was only 14, but they wanted him in their early admission program. He'd have to leave home, move to another state, start a whole new life. He was scared. So was I. You don't have to go, I told him. Yes, I do, he said. You taught me not to run from things, Dad. But you also taught me to run toward the right things. This is one of them. He was right. I knew he was right. But that didn't make it any easier to let him go. A few weeks later, I found myself standing outside Mrs. Carmichael's old classroom. The door was open. She was inside packing boxes. Her desk was bare. The walls were empty. She looked smaller somehow, older. She saw me in the doorway and froze. Mr. Weaver, she said quietly. I stepped inside, my hands in my pockets. I'd thought about this moment for a long time, imagined all the things I'd say to her. But now that I was here, most of those words felt pointless. You could have destroyed me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You had every right to. I looked at her for a long moment. I didn't have to destroy you, I said. You did that yourself. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am. I turned to leave, then stopped. Luke's going to do great things, I said. Not because of you, and not even really because of me, because he refused to believe the lies you told him about himself. I hope you remember that. I walked out and didn't look back. That chapter of our lives was over. It was time to move forward. Months passed. Luke thrived at his new school. He called me every week, telling me about his classes, his projects, the friends he was making. He sounded happy. Really, truly happy. Then one day, I got a call from his old middle school. The new vice principal, a kind woman named Ms. Rodriguez, asked if I'd be willing to speak at a school assembly about mentorship and perseverance. At first, I said no. I didn't want to go back there. Didn't want to relive all those painful memories. But then she said something that changed my mind. There are kids here right now going through what Luke went through. They need to hear that it gets better. They need to hear it from someone who lived it. So I agreed. The day of the assembly, I stood in that same auditorium where Luke had won his award. The students sat in rows, staring up at me. I told them about Luke, about the late nights in the garage, about the failures and the small victories. I told them that one person's opinion of you doesn't define your worth, that the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who feel smallest inside. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterward, several students came up to me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for sharing our story. That's when I realized something. This was never just about Luke. It was about every kid who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. And if our story could help even one of them, then everything we'd been through was worth it. That evening, I sat in the garage, the same garage where Luke and I spent countless nights building his dreams. It was spotless now, organized. The tools hung neatly on the wall. Luke's trophy sat on the workbench, gleaming under the light. Next to it was a photo of my wife, smiling. I liked to think she'd been watching over us this whole time. The door creaked open. Luke walked in, taller now, more confident. He was home for the weekend. In his hands was another award, a smaller one from his new school. He placed it carefully next to the first trophy. "Dad, this one's for you too," he said. I shook my head, smiling through tears I didn't try to hide. "No, son, this one's all you." He sat down next to me, and we stayed there in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of everything we'd built together. Not just the projects and the awards, but something bigger. Proof that kindness and persistence could win. That a father's love could be enough. That a boy who was told he'd never be anything could become. Everything. Mrs. Carmichael's photo no longer hung in the school hallway, but Luke's did, right next to the display case holding his trophy. And every kid who walked past it would know that no matter what anyone said, they could rise above it. Because if Luke Weaver could do it, so could they. That was our legacy. Not revenge, not bitterness, just hope. And sometimes, hope is the most powerful weapon of all.